I am the chess strategist, and today we're going to win another chess game. Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of our rapid speed run. In today's video we are going to be playing another 10+5 rapid game. In the last video we had the black pieces and we played against e4, and we decided to play a different opening we haven't played, which is the traditional e5 against e4. And it was a very interesting game where our opponent played the Scotch game, and we got an interesting game where we had a slightly inferior position out of the opening, but our strong defense and calculation allowed us to prevail in the end. So today I'm hoping that we can get a game with the white pieces. We haven't had a game with the white pieces in a while, and I'd like to show you guys a new opening with white that I think could be useful. E4 is a great move, of course, but there are other moves that you can play in chess. One of them being d4. d4 is an excellent first move. For one, the pawn is defended by the queen, and our opponent plays the Dutch defense. Now, the Dutch defense is not an opening that you see very often. Usually, you see it with traditional development and play, but today we have the Dutch defense right after d5. So just d5 or d4 and then f5. And f5 has a few weaknesses. The first one being it creates this weakness on the diagonal. But before we do anything else, we want to play very actively. We want to develop our pieces, and I'm thinking we can go for knight f3 here. Knight f3 is nice because we're reinforcing our control over this e5 square, and a lot of the time also your opponent in the Dutch is going to want to fianchetto their bishop. So they're going to try to create pressure on our d4 pawn, and we don't want to allow that. The other thing we do here is we stay very flexible with our moves by developing our knight first before we develop our bishop, or we play e3. We're getting a lot of options. And here I'm going to play an opening that many people don't like, or many people have a aversion to, but I think it's a great opening, especially at the beginner level, and that's the London system. The London system is characterized by d4 openings where you develop your bishop to f4 and then you play e3, and you have a very schematic form of development here. Alright, so our opponent just developed his knight to f6, and we don't want to allow him to play this nasty move knight to h5, so what we're going to do first before we do anything else is we're going to play h3 to create an escape square. It's a very schematic development of your pieces. You're going to play e3 as soon as you can, and you're going to develop your light square bishop, usually to this square on d3, and you're going to develop your knight to d2 pretty much every single time. Now, there are other ways to develop our light square bishop. Here, I do like the placement of the bishop on this square, but I also noticed that it does create the idea of advancing the pawn forward and forking. So I am going to be playing bishop e2 because I don't want to create any tactical ideas for our opponent. And here our opponent has expanded with a5, and I just want to meet that with a4. I don't want to allow them to push up their pawn anymore. I want to just stop the expansion. a4 is a very common idea in the London anyways. And yeah, our next few moves are going to be very simple. In the London, you're going to castle, you're going to play c3, you're going to move your knight to d2, and you're going to have nice connected knights in the center of the board. You're going to have strong pieces. Here our opponent looks like he is trying to orchestrate this move e5, which we are temporarily blocking. We do have, he plays this move, we have pawn takes, and we have a knight and a bishop covering, so we're fine. So we're just going to castle. And yeah, next few moves are very simple. Queen b3 is also a move that you play a lot in the London, creating a lot of pressure. And our opponent jumps his knight to the center of the board. Very interesting. We can now challenge that knight with knight to d2. Our opponent takes. Now the question here is, do we take with the knight or do we take with the queen? Now if we take with the queen, it disallows this pawn from moving, so he can advance, and we can't really take back with the pawn because the queen will be, or sorry, the pawn will be pinned. But here, if we develop the knight first, if we do it with the knight, then there's no pin on the pawn. The knight is blocking. So here, let's just, if we took with the queen here, imagine the queen is on this square. He advances e5. We can't take because he's going to take back. I guess we could force an exchange of queens, but I don't know if that's super favorable for us. I like the idea of undeveloping the knight, maybe putting on a nicer square. Or it could just go right back. Either way, I like our development of our pieces here. We have this bishop, which is out of the pawn chain. We have this bishop, which can be developed further to c4 if needed. And we want to make our opponent commit his pawns in the center. He can still play one of these pawn breaks. Well, this isn't really a pawn break. It's more just a pawn advance. But he's preparing this e5 pawn break. I'm not sure if it's really the best move for him. Anyways, he's decided to develop his bishop to f6, further preparing that move. And we're just going to drop our knight back. We don't want to allow him to play e5 in a good version. And let's see what he goes for. Another way to discourage this e5 move is redeveloping our bishop to c4. Bishop on c4 prevents this pawn from advancing, and it delays him playing that move by another turn. And what's so scary about him playing e5? Well, his bishop is kind of being stuck behind this pawn. It's not really going to be a great piece until he can open up this diagonal, or he can deploy along this diagonal, which I think is what he should do. I think he should fianchetto here. But he's forsaking his development for pawn play and preparing pawn breaks. And if that pawn break doesn't come quickly, it's going to be him that suffers. So here we're just going to pin the pawn. We're going to see what his plan is. He might just scoot his king over to h8. No, and he actually does something that we were trying to encourage. In this position, we were trying to encourage a move like this. This move, d5, first of all, it fixes the pawn structure. And second of all, it gives us a lovely outposted square at e5. So we are so happy about that move. That move is a great one to see. And we can just drop our bishop right back to e2. It's done its job. It went to c4 to encourage a move, a weakening, very weakening move like this. And now we're seeing his bishop is being buried behind these pawns. You see the light squared pawns are making this light squared bishop absolutely horrible. So I am absolutely thrilled about how our position is developed here. Personally, I like the idea of breaking here with c4 and opening up a file on the queen side from which we can attack. Now, usually in the London system, you're going to play something that in a position that involves c3. But as you can see here, there's not really very much pressure on our pawn because he's neglected to play this all-important move c5. c5 is an excellent move for black and all of these London-style positions where you got a pawn on d4. And he's neglected to play that move, so our pawn in the center isn't very challenged. We can attack. We don't need to be defensive. And the first thing I'm noticing is that our bishop is not very well placed. If we break here and he takes, we get this nice bishop on c4. And we're going to also get the c-file. We're going to be able to attack this pawn and keep it pinned. Threaten to take this pawn at any moment. We're going to have so many threats, and our opponent is going to have to keep them under wraps. Also, this bishop is basically just guarding this square from our knight. Our knight will jump onto that square as soon as possible. Our bishop may jump on that square very soon, as soon as the next move, so that if there's an inventive trade, we can advance our knight onto that square. But let's wait. If this knight develops here, it can challenge our knight. So we don't want to jump our knight on there too soon. Let's get our pieces developed. One thing I like is our queen coming out to b3. Queen on b3 is just an excellent piece, defending this pawn that may become loose at some point. Also adding an attacker to this construction and vacating the c and d files for rooks. Nice. Okay. So his bishop is just trapped. I mean, it's basically just defending this pawn. That's its only job. And the rook lift idea may be one that he's interested in. I would like to see, though, this bishop is now basically permitted to invade at its own will. I'm really quite a big fan of advancing the pawn here and sticking our bishop on this nice outposted square. And we're seeing that this bishop is not really a great piece right now. We want to trade it. If we could trade this bishop, it would be excellent. But our dark square bishop is a great piece. Our dark square bishop is excellent. His dark square bishop is just staring at a pawn. So it's all about piece optimization. Whose pieces are better? And our opponent does carry out his ideal pawn break in the center of the board, which is this e5 pawn break. Let's see. So we take, and our pawns have been split, which is not very good. Now we do have this pawn hanging here. Our opponent can take it, but he's decided to go for the pawn in the center of the board. I think that's a rather odd decision considering this pawn was just completely left hanging. Yeah, I think that's a rather odd move from him. Well, here one thing we can do is just exchange our pawns. I like the idea of... I really like this idea. Get our knight on a different square, more active, eventually drop our bishop back and evict his knight. And play off the weakness of this pawn here. I'm noticing something that's very interesting in a lot of these positions. One thing is that this bishop is doing a lot of work. It's defending the f5 pawn. It's also defending the b7 pawn. And the b7 pawn is one that our opponent does not want to give up because it gives us the rank, and also it's going to come with an attack on the rook. Alright, so here I'm also noticing that this pawn is now hanging. Our opponent has noticed he can attack that. So what I'm going to do is just drop our rook over. Our rook isn't doing anything over on a1 now that our queen's defending this pawn, so the rook can fill that job very well. I'm wondering if... Now, we've actually made a blunder here. We've left the tactic hanging. I'm wondering if our opponent is going to see this tactic. We've made a mistake here. I'd be surprised if our opponent finds this nice move. Bishop takes d4. We cannot take because of the hanging bishop here. So I'm wondering if our opponent will find that move. So I think on this move, our appropriate response was most likely queen c2. That way, if our opponent took, we could take, and then if he took here, we could take with the queen. And if we took immediately with the bishop, then we would take, and the queen would cover. So I think that was our better move. I think we did make a mistake. I'm wondering if our opponent will see the mistake that we've made. If not, we are going to be very quick about correcting it. Our next move will most likely be bishop d3 if we're given the chance to play it. And our opponent does find the tactic, and that is quite frustrating. So I think the best way to salvage this position is most likely just to take and use the development. And so that's what we're going to do. Kick the queen to a very awkward square and use the development of the rook to invade. And that's what we're going to have to do. Invade on the second rank here. Scoot our queen over. Create a lot of pressure. That's all we have to do in these kind of positions where we've made a mistake and we've gained a bit of development in exchange for material. So, potential development squares for our pieces. Our queen wants to come to g3. We need to create an attack immediately. Our opponent is up a full knight, and because we've made a mistake, and in order to capitalize on the small bit of development advantage we've gotten, we need to develop our pieces as fast as possible. So that means our rook's going to come to the open file, our queen's going to scoot over to an attacking square, our bishop is going to be on an outposted attacking square as well, and we're going to try to create as many threats as possible and try to stir something up here, because otherwise our opponent is going to consolidate their material advantage, and it's going to be very difficult to win the game. Alright, so I'm seeing that we can create a checkmate threat immediately, so we're just going to do that. We're going to create the checkmate threat. Let's create the checkmate threat that forces our opponent to make some sort of defensive move, defending this g7 pawn that is now hanging. He can do it with his queen, he can do it by advancing his pawn, he can do it with his rook as well. Now, if our opponent tries to challenge our rook in any way, if they drop their rook over here, or they drop their rook to this square, we are going to reinforce. We want to keep a rook on the file. Notice how this bishop is obstructing the connection between the two rooks. So the back rank is temporarily weak. And if we continue to make threats that our opponent has to respond to, he's not going to have time to develop this bishop. So, although we did make a mistake, we are seeing that our opponent is going to pay for their lack of development from earlier in the game. The lack of development is going to hurt them because of just the inability to defend. Now that we've doubled up, we are threatening to play this devastating move. Rook e8 check. Rook e8 check would have to be met by knight takes and then rook. Rook takes. Rook takes would force the other rook to move, and then, yeah, it would be kind of devastating for our opponent. And here our opponent decides he wants to develop his bishop finally. I think that is an excellent move. And I'm seeing that the only thing defending this bishop is the rook and the knight. If we're able to distract, we can find a way to get past our opponent's defenses. And one thing I'm noticing is we can attack the knight. We can also develop this bishop. This bishop isn't doing very much. What would be the best way to do that? We could put it on this square. Putting it here would be kind of out of course. I think it wouldn't be on the right square there. So let's just put it here. Our opponent now has a lot of defenders on this square. I feel like they're going to challenge the file here. Our opponent is playing this defensively very well. Of course, when you are in these lost positions, you have to attack. But if your opponent defends well, there's not much you can do. So let's see if we can salvage something here. And here our opponent challenges our rook on the file. We basically have to take. Opponent takes with a knight. And we got to see if there's a way to get our queen into the action here. Okay, so we're going to develop our queen back over to b3, where it's going to be attacking this pawn. Opponent takes. We take. And now we have a passed pawn, which is an asset. And one interesting thing is we do have this passed pawn now. If our opponent allows us to advance this passed pawn, it could be very devastating for him. Notice that promotion would come with check. So I feel like now we are still down a bishop. And this game will be difficult, but we do have something to play for, and that is this passed pawn. When you're behind or you're lost, one way to come back into game is to identify your win conditions. And here, our win condition is most certainly we need to promote this passed pawn. So here I'm noticing we can just take. Opponent's creating a threat. I don't know when they're going to create the threat. I believe they want to put their bishop somewhere to attack this pawn or their rook. Not sure exactly. If we develop our rook here and he takes and we take, he could scoot his queen over to attack the pawn. Then we could defend the pawn and put our queen here. Notice the bishop is covering the defense of the file. We're going to give a check. We're going to lift our rook. We're going to pre-move taking. That's the only move if he takes. And our opponent, I must say, I was absolutely shocked there for a second, blunders and gives us his queen. And we win the game. Wow. Okay. And talk about a chess game. Oh my gosh. We were completely lost. Yeah, and now it is winning for white. Wowee. Okay. Our opponent plays, we played d4, which we don't usually play, and our opponent played the Dutch defense. And we played this London style with bishop f4. And we made sure to make some room for our bishop. We developed our pawn. And see, this position is fairly equal. Slight advantage for white. We decided to play a4, which was a sensible move. Just preventing them from advancing their pawn to a4. They played d6. And I think our first mistake here was probably allowing this e5 idea I think after our opponent played d5, I was less concerned about e5, and I just kind of let him play it in a good version. And here e5 is a great move, and it gets him a much better position than he had. And here we do blunder, allowing this tactic. This tactic was what really screwed us over. This bishop takes d4, and I only saw it when it was too late. We went into it. It was the best move. Taking was the best move, so moving our bishop somewhere else wasn't a good idea. So I'm glad we did end up going for the best continuation. But it wasn't pretty, and we found a pretty precise attack here, invading with our rook. And we should have just put the other rook on the file earlier, but that's fine. Here I thought we played this fine. Our opponent is playing this very well. We traded pieces. We dropped our queen over, creating more threats. We got a pass pawn. And practically, I think this position is harder to play than the one that we had a few moves earlier. This pass pawn is dangerous, and our opponent was feeling the pressure. We did play this rook e7 move eventually. We should have played it on this move. I realized during the game I shouldn't have given that check, because with this rook invading, we are, and the queen's still on this square, we are actually attacking the bishop. But after I give the check, we're not attacking the bishop anymore. Our opponent does not have to take the rook. And then here our opponent just blunders his queen. And I was so flabbergasted that I didn't even get a chance to make a move before he resigned. So wow. I think this game is really just a testament to, you always play till the end, never resign. You're going to be able to salvage some games that look completely lost. Like this game looked completely lost. We made a tactical error. But yeah, we stuck in the game and we pressured our opponent, and the pressure eventually got to them and they blundered. So wow. Still, the computer says we played an 86% accurate game. Our one blunder was that allowing that move. Bishop takes d4. Rook ac1 was not good. Queen c2. I noticed during the game that was the best move, defending against all of the threats. So definitely should have played that move. Once I realized we blundered, though, we played pretty well. We made one mistake, queen b8. We should have just developed our rook immediately to e7. But yeah, otherwise I think we played a pretty good defensive game. I think we were able to make use of our attacking opportunities once we lost a piece, and we made something out of the game that was supposed to be nothing. So I really hope you do enjoy these videos. Not every game am I going to play perfectly, but that's how we learn in chess. That's how we get better. So I hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and see ya.